Monzo Business is the proud partner of The Rest is Money. Now, did you know that over 600,000 businesses are already banking with Monzo Business? And mine is one of them. To celebrate us teaming up, we've got a special offer for you. New customers get Monzo Business Pro or Team for free for the first 6 months. Just head to monzo.com/therestismoney to claim it for your business. Now, maybe you run your own company and you're looking for a bank with the solutions to make your financial admin easier, like expense cards that help your team save loads of time as your business grows. Just go to monzo.com/therestismoney to learn more about the special offer and find out which of their plans is right for you. Offer is available to new Monzo Business customers only for either Pro or Team plan. Offer ends on the 31st of July 2025. After the offer period ends, Pro will be £9 a month and Team from £25 a month. Expense cards are only available with Team. Only sole traders or limited company directors in the UK can apply. T's and C's apply.
Hello and welcome to The Rest is Money. It's a sort of Trump's turmoil special, isn't it, Steph?
Yes, it certainly is. Hello, everyone. I mean, it's the 8th of May. What a day. Because, literally everything's happened in one day. We've got VE Day, so 80 years since the end of the Second World War, Victory in Europe Day. A trade deal with America, a cut in interest rates here in the UK, a new Pope.
Pope Robert.
Yeah, Pope Robert.
Yeah. And let me be absolutely clear.
Let's get this in there.
It's very, very important because one of the things that I constantly lament is how few Roberts there are these days. And I suspect we are now going to see a flurry of baby Roberts.
And, your sainthood can't be far down the line as well now. But amongst all of this as well, big day for you because basically Downing Street sent you to the wrong place, didn't they? You got sent to Coventry. What happened?
Yeah, when I get off the train, I look at the Downing Street email. It's the email that every single political reporter had received. It said, go to a Jaguar Land Rover site in Coventry. Got in my taxi, drove half an hour to Coventry. It's already 35 quid on the meter. I then get a panic text from my office saying, they've sent you the wrong address. So I stayed in this taxi driver couldn't believe his luck. He's never had a fare like this. We go all the way back to Solihull. I can't even begin to tell you the size of the bill. All I will tell you is I am going to submit it to the government to pay. Rachel Reeves, obviously, when she gets the bill, is going to have to put taxes up.
Yeah, because that'll be the fiscal headroom gone now. Is that why the presser was late? Because Washington had said, didn't they, that it was going to be at 10 a.m. their time, which is 3 p.m. our time. And then everyone was, I was doing that classic thing of watching all the news channels, just try and fill for ages. Well, was it you lot trying to get to Solihull? I
mean, this is one of the most surreal events I've ever witnessed where you've got Donald Trump hailing what he says is this enormously important trade deal. He's in the Oval Office. He rings up his mate, Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer is in some weird anonymous room at Jaguar Land Rover on the speakerphone to the American. It all just sort of dragged on. I mean, it was nuts. I don't know if you watched that conversation between the two of them.
Yeah.
What is it with the British Prime Minister referring to the American president as Donald the whole time? Hello, Donald.
Yes.
This is great, Donald. This is the best deal ever, Donald.
And with Peter Mandelson stood behind him, just the kind of shadow over Trump. That was the other thing.
And Peter Mandelson doing that. Oh, Mr. President, you are so great. You are so wonderful.
It was all his hair, basically.
It was. As diplomacy goes, this was slightly at the sick-making end of it, but it seems to work.
I kept thinking that Trump was just going to end the call. There was a few times when Keir started to talk a bit too much in Trump's eyes about the positives for the UK, and I could just see him potentially hovering over, okay, that's enough, bye.
And also the background to the whole deal is sort of weird. I mean, we'd been genuinely trying to negotiate a comprehensive trade deal that wasn't just about getting rid of, the so-called reciprocal tariffs, those are the big tariffs, the 27.5% on motor car manufacturers. We all thought it was 25%, but of course we'd forgotten there's already 2.5% there. So 27.5% on motor manufacturers like Jaguar Land Rover, 25% on steel, but also 10% on pretty much everything else. And the British government was trying to get rid of the lot. And they then, last night, the British trade negotiators in Washington ring up the business secretary who is in the city, I think at Mansion House, giving some speech or other. It's about 8 or 9 o'clock. And they talk to Jonathan Reynolds, who's been on the show, and say, look, they're not going to do a comprehensive deal, but, if we allow them to sell a load of beef and ethanol, basically no tariffs into the UK, he will reduce the motor car tariff to the standard 10% on 100,000 cars. And not sure 100,000 cars is enough, because Jaguar Land Rover on its own, as I understand it, was currently selling about 100,000 cars into America. It's quite restrictive because it is subject to that quota. So if you're Aston Martin or, if we end up selling more than 100,000, then the motor car manufacturers have to pay that 27.5%, right?
And how do they work that out, though? Because that's the thing I was wondering. If you then reach the quota, and let's say it's Jaguar Land Rover gets the full quota, then what do Aston Martin go, well, hang on a minute, do we have to sell all of ours at 27.5% more?
Well, I don't know whether do they count them in? Do they count them in as they cross the border? I've literally it's sort of interesting. That kind of detail we need to find out about. And then allegedly, right, they were also saying that steel was going to have 0 tariffs on it. But then if you look at what the American government has put out, that's not quite what it says. And so it looks to me as though maybe it's 0% on a limited amount of steel exports to America, and then again, but we don't know what that limit is. They haven't published the quota. So I think again, steel, there will be potentially tariffs if we happen to have a steel. We're lucky to have any steel being made in Britain at all at the moment, given how much that industry has shrunk. But government has rescued British steel. If they succeed in selling steel to America that Americans want, who knows whether they'll bust through the limits and tariffs become payable. But the big point is basically that's all that was on offer, right? The British trade negotiators ring Jonathan Reynolds. He has to take a view about whether he thinks it's worth doing. I think he says to his trade negotiators, write this up. And then in the middle, obviously it was a very, very challenging night for both me and the Prime Minister last night, because our beloved Arsenal was being beaten by Paris Saint-Germain. He was watching the match. Midway through the match, he gets a call that Donald Trump is offering him this partial, it's not really a trade deal, it's a deal, it's an arrangement to reduce these tariffs, these big tariffs, not all of them, and he has to make up its mind whether or not to accept it. And I imagine, I mean, look, I was watching the match while doing my TV show last night. I was pretty gloomy. I imagine he was feeling pretty gloomy about the world, and he just thought, what the hell, I'll take this deal. Yeah.
The thing I'm really interested in as well, and I know this is something you've been talking about today, is there's an argument now that actually Trump's been quite tactically smart here by putting up tariffs on this big Liberation Day, and to 25% to much higher for other countries and things. And then everyone like us goes, oh, great, when they come down to 10%, forgetting that they were less than that before all of this happened. And you worked all this out, didn't you, in terms of what we were paying before compared to what we're likely, what we're going to be paying now. It's actually more. So we're not better off in any way other than what was announced on Liberation Day, but we're not better off than we were before that.
Well, we don't actually know when these big tariffs are going to be reduced anyway. Starmer wouldn't put a date on it. But let's just say this deal does go through. You're absolutely right that we will be better off. Motor manufacturers and steel manufacturers will be better off when those tariffs are reduced than they are today. But if you go back to before Trump was elected and before he started imposing tariffs, the UK is way worse off than it was compared to, under Biden, as it were. And, in round numbers, the tariff that the US imposes on us, on average, in the round, across the board, has gone up by a factor of 3. And the tariffs that we impose on US exporters has been cut by 2/3. I have in the past referred to Donald Trump's approach to tariffs, to the economy as sort of gangster capitalism. And this is, basically bullying or gangsterism paying off, right? Because, in the end, he's put bigger taxes on our businesses, and we have responded by cutting what we charge their businesses and giving better access, particularly to American farmers, to our important market. So, Trump, as you say, has won. And if you're sitting actually almost anywhere in the rest of the world, I think you're going to be feeling very uncomfortable that an economy as important as the UK has capitulated so rapidly. And so the interesting question is this now a sort of example, a precedent, a template for the rest of the world? Have what we've done made it almost now impossible for other countries not to capitulate in the same way? And therefore, to an extent, Trump gets his way. He gets better access to other markets and manages to essentially get a lot of tax from countries like ours. And it'd be very interesting to see, for example, how the EU, how Japan, how South Korea responds. And obviously the most important negotiation of all, starting right now in Switzerland, is between China and America. And those are the mega tariffs that are in play. They're the ones that really matter. I don't think China will capitulate. In this game of chicken, they're not going to blink first. But anyway, as far as the rest of the world is concerned, I'm not sure the rest of the world looks at the UK and thinks, "Oh, you're being clever, Mr. Starmer." They may think, "Oh, Mr. Starmer, it would have been slightly better for us if you'd hung firm and shown a bit more solidarity with the rest of us, so we could all have got better deals."
And the sacrifices we've made now in terms of the agricultural side of things is a really interesting one. But let's go to a quick break and then we'll come back on that. So we'll see you in a couple of minutes.
Welcome back to Arrest Is Money special with me, Robert Peston.
And me, Steph McGovern. Now, you mentioned before the break about the fact that in terms of what we've sacrificed and what we've negotiated for these lower tariffs on cars and on steel and aluminium, is the Americans now able to sell a certain amount of beef and other agricultural products as well, like bioethanol is a big one. It's something that you get in the beer industry, also used for fuel. But yeah, the Americans are desperate to sell that to us too.
Yeah, so there are sort of two important points here. One is, as of this moment, Starmer has resisted the enormous American pressure for us to take chlorine-washed chicken and hormone-injected beef and the other products that are, regarded in this country as a bit controversial. And the main reason for that is that if he had allowed those products into the country, there is absolutely no chance he could have done a better deal than the current one we have with the European Union on access for our agri products, our food to the EU market. And we're only 10 days away from an incredibly important British EU summit, which will range across a trade deal, a security deal, a defence deal. Big part of all this will be agri products. And EU has made it absolutely clear, never, ever will chlorine-washed chicken or hormone-injected beef ever get into the EU. So if we'd taken it, we would have then been permanently shut out of a better agricultural deal with the EU. So that is why Starmer has, at least at this point, stood firm. Although when I pointed out to him that all the polling shows that the British people actually think that a trade deal with the EU is way more important than the US, and that therefore he should probably do an even more ambitious trade deal with the EU than the one he's considering, he came back with his stock response that, he's not going to choose between the EU and the US. He's still trying to have his cake and eat it. I don't think that's sustainable over the medium term. But let's just, though, go to the other material point you made, the UK has done something quite risky in capitulating to some of Trump's pressure when it comes to things like zero tariffs on ethanol, this new deal on beef, because under global trading rules, there is this important concept called the most favored nation rule, which basically means if you offer a preferential deal to one country, you've basically got to offer it to all other countries with whom you do not have a fully fledged free trade arrangement, right? And this is not a free trade arrangement with the US. This is a very partial deal. And in essentially doing these little narrow tit-for-tat deals with America, we have opened ourselves up to a legal case from other countries that they also now need, access to the UK for their beef and their ethanol. And when we finally get the small print of this, we may find there are other side deals that we've offered America that basically breach the most favored nation rule. And we may find ourselves having to offer these deals to other countries or find ourselves on the receiving end of an international law problem.
Yeah. And talking of small print, when we've been looking at what might be in this deal and the sacrifices we might have to make, we were talking about the digital services tax, so the tax paid by the big tech companies. Now, we know that this isn't part of this tariff deal so far, but you think this is going to come further down the line and to try and reduce these tariffs even more.
So the British government, Keir Starmer, Jonathan Reynolds, have both said today that they are still hopeful that across the board 10% tariff can be reduced. Peter Mandelson has said today that he wants this really broad technological partnership with the US. I have been told by senior members of the government that the digital services tax, this is this 2% tax on the digital giants, on the likes of, Google and Meta and Amazon, raises about £800 million a year. It's supposed to level the playing field with, bricks and mortar retailers or traditional media companies. But it is, one of the things that are being negotiated in what the government hopes will be a much more ambitious trade agreement, a proper trade agreement, which what we had today is absolutely not, that they hope could be negotiated in a matter of months. I mean, for what it's worth, I think good luck with that. If I just look at the history of free trade negotiations with all countries, but particularly with America, they tend to go on for years and years and years. But there is a theoretical possibility that Trump now loves us so much that he will expedite these talks. I'm rather skeptical about it. And in those circumstances, it could be that our tax sovereignty would be basically undermined, that we might give to Washington changes to this tax, which they don't like. And most British people would say is a perfectly fair tax.
And then the other big industries who are waiting to see what it all means for them is obviously the pharmaceutical sector, massive in the UK. I think we export something like nearly £7 billion worth of pharmaceuticals to the US. And then also the film and TV industry. We were talking about them the other day, and Trump's determined to put tariffs on that sector as well. So again, all the kind of players, the big players in those sectors are wondering what on earth all of this is going to mean, because so far it's only cars and steel that have been talked about in the sense of something we're going to benefit from.
Well, another element actually of what was announced today, although I have to say it's sort of, none of us really know what it means, but one of the things Keir Starmer was very excited about when he did his press conference is that part of what has been agreed today is that as and when Donald Trump imposes tariffs on pharmaceutical companies, he has allegedly promised Britain that we will get a better deal than the rest of the world. But what on earth that means, I've talked to British officials and ministers and none of them quite know. Do you remember I talked about the other thing that Trump wants to do, which is to bring down what the American government, its Medicaid program, pays American drug companies for their drugs to the kind of levels that the NHS pays, right? And one of the things that I fear, and actually I got some sense of this from a UK minister today, that they have, I don't know, maybe unwittingly agreed to, is that in order to help American drug companies cut what they charge the American government for these important drugs, I think the British government may have accepted that the NHS is going to have to start paying more for these drugs to prop up the drug companies' profits. Now, at a time when, the NHS has very limited resources anyway, if that happens, I think that'll be hugely damaging and hugely controversial. So I think we just need to get to the bottom of what the British government has essentially allowed to be put on the table. And then separately on this whole, tariffs on film companies. I mean, this sort of does my head in because, as you probably know, okay, technically speaking, you can't put tariffs on services, right? Technically speaking, tariffs only apply to goods, right? Now, you can, in some ways, tax services when they cross borders. It's not to say there aren't ways of putting in, but it's not easy. So when Trump said he was going to put tariffs on films, I mean, none of us actually had the faintest idea what he meant, because
how you would do it.
I mean, if you were shipping DVDs, which almost nobody watches anymore, from Britain to America, okay, that's a physical thing. You can put a tariff on it. But if what you're talking about is a dematerialized thing that you send down the line, across the Atlantic in digital form, and then it gets basically played in a cinema or on a television, how on earth you monitor, the fact that it's come from the UK to the US and how you charge for it? I mean, it's just, I don't know. I mean, the technical problems of raising money for a James Bond film made in the UK is really, it's a bit of a head scratcher.
Well, I was trying to think of this from the perspective of that show I did for Netflix last year when I went AWOL for a month. And, I was filming that celebrity bear hunt program with basically being chased around a Costa Rican jungle by Bear Grylls. How would you account for that? So it was a load of British, well, actually not all British, but predominantly British people filming in Costa Rica, going out on television across the world. How would you ever work that out? If it was filmed if it was all Americans in it, would that be different? Does it have to physically be filmed in America? Like there's look at something like Wicked. Wicked is seen as it's filmed in the UK, but you'd think of it as an American movie. So it's just, like you say, how do you even categorize all of this? The practicalities around it just feel like impossible. And there'd be plenty of ways around it, because we all know there'll be plenty of people employed to try and just find loopholes so that they don't have to pay the tariffs. I mean, there's going to be loads more to talk about on all of this, isn't there? And it's going to keep us going, I imagine, for quite far to come. But before we wrap things up, should we just quickly talk about interest rates? Because obviously that's another thing that happened today. The Bank of England announcing that they are cutting the main base rate from 4.5% to 4.25%. Interesting division amongst the 9 Monetary Policy Committee members. So this group, this bit like a conclave, have decided to cut, but they didn't all agree. A couple of them wanted to keep it at 4.5%.
Including the Bank of England's chief economist, which is sort of extraordinary that the chief economist votes against the majority. He didn't want any cut at all. And our hero, Swati Dhingra, who was on this programme, did what I think would have been the right thing. They cut by 0.25%, as you say. I think they should have cut by 0.5%, because I do think the economy is slowing down quite rapidly and quite worryingly. And she wanted 0.5%, along with Alan Taylor, another member. So there were 2 who wanted 0.5%, 2 who wanted no change at all, boo hiss, and 5, only a slim majority, who wanted 0.25% cut, which is what we are getting. As I say, I was quite struck today. I saw, this was before the Bank of England made its announcement, but Goldman Sachs has come up with a really bearish assessment of the UK's prospects, and it actually thinks that the Bank of England will, and it would have to be in a panic, have to cut interest rates to 2.75% by, I think sort of middle of next year, right? So, and that is way more than most economists are forecasting, and way more than markets are currently discounting. And they say the reason for that is they do think that the underlying, the signs about what's happening in an underlying terms of the British economy is not great.
So do you think, given that they were so split on their decision of what to do with rates, that they now might come down slower than we thought?
Well, look, I'm interested that analysts and the market seem to think that. I mean, I personally think this is an example of, the market being wrong. So whether the interest rate cuts will be as great as Goldman Sachs expects, I can't be sure. But I'd note that markets are now discounting broadly 2 cuts by the end of the year. And my own view would be there will be 3 cuts, maybe more. But certainly I'd be staggered if only another 0.5% came off before the end of the year.
I still stand by my view that it doesn't really, domestic changes to rates do not do much for inflation when it's so global. But anyway, that's a chat for another time. We should probably wrap things up, shouldn't we? As we say, there's going to be loads to talk about as the finer details of these deals and things happen. But thank you so much again for listening to us. But that's it from us for now. Bye-bye.
All the best. Goodbye.